many in here made it to the conference 6 months ago in Bryce Canyon? So about half. Okay. And how many of you actually attended this session when we did that? 6 months.
Then you're going to be bored.
Die hard. So Josh is going to come up and sit in this seat and basically give the presentation on what we did 6 months ago. So no.
You're welcome.
I think we're going to. So Josh, you are going to hear a little bit of what we talked about 6 months ago. But what we're going to do is we're just going to talk for just a second about what the last 2 years have been like for UJIC on the UJIC board and some of the things that we've done and had to go through, and then we'll kind of open it up into a panel. You know, like everybody else, we were moving along in the...
Should we do introductions?
So, oh yeah, we should do introductions. Let's do introductions.
Okay, I'm Stan
So-
McShinsky. I am the conference chair.
I'm Casey Hansen. I'm the current UJIC chair.
You should say where you're from, too.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like who you represent.
I work for Provo City.
And what position?
Are you in that large position?
Oh, I see. Oh, I'm an at-large position. Sorry, I didn't know what we're going for.
So,
we're going.
So again, an informal group, as you guys are getting a taste of right now. So as we come into this, so yeah, no,
One more thing, right?
I'm Casey Hansen. I'm the current UJIC chair, and I'm in the industry seat on the UJIC board.
And I'm Dave Henry, and I'm filling a county seat.
Sean Beecher, and I'm on the city seat.
Nick Krieger, I think I'm on the at-large.
I think you're at large.
Yeah, I'm at-large, and I'm the chief data and chief geographic officer of Solid.
Phoebe McNeely, I'm at the University of Utah, and I'm in the tag-along seat.
She's the first half of the
It's like a
education
Girl Scout
chair.
cookie, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm Chris McGinty, I'm with Utah State University, and I'm the second half of the education chair.
Oh, and I'm up for a re-election, as is Stan.
Yeah.
I didn't say this before, but I actually work for the city of Spanish Fork as a GIS administrator.
Yeah, we're really doing well here. I guess I should mention that I work for Gateway Mapping. So, and that's us. Thanks for coming, everybody. So,
Doesn't take us all day.
there we go. At this point, everybody's saying, this is our UJIC board that's putting this conference on. Good plans.
They really
So,
know what they're doing.
Our only excuse in this is that we've had our minds on a lot of things so far today. So we've been moving quickly, but we're really grateful that everybody came out to the conference. And we're excited that we're able to kind of start to get back into, you know, a little bit of as close to a normal feel for a conference as we can. You know, well, 6 months ago, we held the conference in Bryce Canyon. And for those that came, it was a good conference. And it felt normal. This one so far has been even more of a back to normal type of thing. But 2 years ago, we were, you know, in March like everybody else, and when all of a sudden things started changing and we started hearing the news, and we were all geared up and ready for our conference down in Bryce Canyon. And many of you were probably already signed up for that conference that was to be held in Bryce Canyon. And we talked as a board, and we said, well, what do we do about this? You know, where do we go? What do we do? And we decided, well, let's just kind of ride it out, see what happens. And we waited a few weeks, and things didn't get better. And we waited a few more weeks, and things didn't get better. And we missed our first in-person UJIC board meeting in a very long time, and had that via Zoom, which changed a lot of things like everybody else. And so then we said, well, let's just bump it to October, and we'll push it to October. We'll still go with Bryce Canyon. We talked to Bryce Canyon. We organized all of
We had a
that.
virtual conference first.
And so we moved it, well, no, we moved it to October. And then as things kept going along, and a lot of people re-registered for October and said, okay, this is good. We're just going to hold on to that registration. We'll plan that. And it soon became apparent that it wasn't going to work in October. And so we held.
So I had to call back one more time, Bryce Canyon, and say, hey, one more time, we're not going to hold it.
And at that point we said, well, let's
And
move
they're
it
like-
to, yeah.
They're like zombies.
So at that point we said, well, okay, we're going to move it to May, and we'll do a virtual conference. And so we put together a virtual, how many people attended the virtual conference that we held? So almost everybody
Awesome.
in here.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thoughts on that? I'm just curious to get a little bit of, it was a different kind of thing, right? I mean, we had.
Next time I need to do it on a day I'm at home, because I still kept getting interrupted.
Oh, right.
You know,
That's interesting.
The things you learned over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you gotta take a day off. Or
Well, just
schedule,
say,
or
I'm working from home.
I'm
this
working from
day,
home that day.
And,
So,
and actually do that.
so we put that together and we said, well, let's at least provide something, let's at least keep some kind of momentum going in the GIS community. And so we pre-recorded a bunch of sessions, and we thought that a lot of those ones that were made available on YouTube, that was kind of neat that we were able to see those. But we
Thanks,
came around, and then we came
Shout
around,
out to Tommy.
and so then along came May of 2021. We got close to that, and it all got pushed again. And so, but we said, okay, at this point, we were going to have a conference in October, no matter what. We've got to do this. It was also about that point where we were all looking at each other and saying, we were supposed to have had a board election in 2020, and we weren't able to have one because we didn't have a conference. And how all of us have been on the board for 2 years, we haven't had a board election. So we pushed for a board election, and then all of a sudden we realized that we can't have a board election unless we have a conference, because it's in our bylaws to do that.
We became very familiar
And
with
so,
that.
so I think the group that you're seeing here, it was kind of like we were like war buddies coming back from Vietnam or something like that after that, because we went through all of these things. But finally, we were able to hold the conference last fall, and we decided to do the hybrid conference. Did anybody in here attend the virtual version of the Bryce Canyon conference? I'm just curious. Thoughts on that? How did that work out? There were people.
First time I ever attended it in my pajamas, so yeah. It was
So somehow this session ended up in the virtual track of this conference. So waving to everybody at home right now who is watching this virtually, and hopefully that's working out to be an okay thing. So at this point, then we, then the last piece of that story is we finished up with Bryce Canyon, and we've decided to try and get back on the track again, back to May where we've been. And so we've had our second conference in 6 months, which was also a little bit of a scramble to get things put together.
And you had the elections again.
We held the elections again. Sean was elected to the board. And interestingly, most of the correspondence that the board has had has been virtual. We've had a few in-person meetings, but it's mostly been moved to virtual, and that's still been pretty efficient. But we're fortunate in the center that we have right here with the UNIT Conference Center, because it's a very good venue, good folks to work with, so it was able to come together pretty easily in a short period of time. And we're grateful for the UJIC community above all of this, for the patience that everybody had as we went through trying to figure out how to handle this and how to keep things going and how to keep momentum going, putting 2 conferences together very quickly. And I was amazed at this conference at how quickly our tracks of presentations filled up. I mean, there have been often times in normal years where we've been looking to fill slots and calling people and trying to find things and doing a little bit of scrambling there. Well before we got to the point where we were closing registration, we were out of spaces. And that just shows that people are excited and ready to do this. So with that, that's kind of the background of the last couple of years and thoughts on that. We can talk about a little bit about going forward. Do we want to, what specific items should
Can I just add
we
one
mention?
thing? I think one thing that the board also realized as we were forced to go to Zoom along with everyone else for board meetings is that, traditionally the board has mostly been along the Wasatch Front, Logan to Provo, but with the ability to do Zoom and hybrid meetings, it really allows the board to be representative of Utah and from anywhere, because you don't have to necessarily drive to these meetings, which prior we didn't have that option, and you would be driving monthly to Salt Lake City or Provo or
Yeah.
somewhere.
I had tried to do a meeting from my office years ago on the phone with the speakerphone in the thing, and it's like, this sucks, you know.
Can't hear, you can't do anything.
But you know, now you could do it.
So that works out pretty well.
Can I mention one thing? Having come from the UJIC committee, or community I meant to say, to the UJIC board, that a lot of people may not realize is on Tuesdays before the conference, the UJIC board actually holds a GIS day in the community that they're in. And I don't know how many people actually know about that. And that has been something that's kind of cool to do, is to go and present to high schoolers some of the GIS stuff that people are doing.
I think that's an important thing to bring up, Sean, just as we talk a little bit about what UJIC is doing. And, you know, sometimes, a lot of times people think that the only initiative that we have is the conference, and that's definitely the most time-consuming one, and that's what we do. But we do try to give back to the community and involve folks, and a big part of that involves GIS days. So both at the conference and in the fall time, we try to put on GIS day events, and those are amazing to be able to be with high school, you know, kids, and in the fall time we usually meet with elementary school kids, and it's pretty neat to see the difference that can make, and there's a lot of enthusiasm there. So
I think that's a great story from our last actual conference here, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep, we had a similar event in 2018, and we worked with USU, UNFAS, and they're fantastic. They let us into their facilities, they give us Chromebooks, all this stuff. But the woman that we had worked with over here before, I contacted her, and she was so excited. She's like, after my son attended that the activity with the UJIC and flying the drones and you know, the work with Phoebe and Dave and everybody that participated, he went to Utah State and is graduating with a degree in wildlife and GIS this right last
Because of
week.
GIS Day?
And so that's just a good example of the outreach that UJIC does, and these kids do go, and we had so much good interaction yesterday.
Yeah.
yesterday, it feels like a month ago. It was yesterday.
But you know, these kids are getting ready. They're 10th, 11th, 12th graders getting ready to figure out what they're going to do with their lives. And GIS is something that they actually have at the high school, so they have a class. Unfortunately, they're canceling it, even though it was really popular, but they ran out of money for it. And the school board, in their infinite wisdom, won't renew it, which is too bad, because those kids really enjoyed it. So at least this gives us an opportunity. We've been to Escalante, we've been to Morgan, we've been to Midway, or Richfield, you know, so we've been able to do this around the state.
And these are rural places, like he's pointing out. These are, you know, we have it in the Wasatch Front. We get kids all the time. But these rural places that he's talking about.
Yeah.
We actually found out that one of the high school students yesterday has a father that's in this community.
Yeah.
GIS.
This GIS guy. Yeah, GIS
For
industry.
outlaw engineering.
For outlaw engineering, yeah.
But I think that this part is really, really cool, is especially in these rural areas where they don't get a lot of visiting, presentations and things. They're, for the most part, really receptive. Chris does a lot of legwork. Chris does a huge amount to organize these events. But it has a huge impact on these students, whether they're going to pursue a degree or just learn more about it or take a class here and there. It's a really big benefit that UJIC provides these communities.
And to that point, I would say that if you do know people in these communities that are, you know, that would be receptive to this kind of thing, and you know where UJIC is going to go in the future, or we may not be going there, but we could do a special outreach to them. Let us know, and if you have contacts, even better, because every time we try and set these up, they think we're trying to sell them something.
Yes.
We're not trying to sell anybody. Well, yeah, we're trying to sell them on, you know.
Yeah, GIS.
But you know, if you do have those contacts, you know, just email me and I'll reach out to them and we'll start trying to set some up. Because we have talked about taking some, you know, a couple trips during the year to go, you know, day trips to different parts of the state to do this kind of stuff. So, and the other part of this whole education thing is you've seen our interns for this conference, scholarship winners. Yep, right over here. Jesse's in here. anyway, but, you know, that's another thing that we get to do, and we get to reach out to the, you know, more the collegiate level, but at the same time, it's a great opportunity. And I did it like 16, 17 years ago. So, you know, I don't know if it was good, but being, you know, penalized now with the access.
Let's come back around.
No, it's good though. So, you know, to that end, if you have kids that are, you know, going to college and this stuff, you know, tell them to watch out, because we'll have one
Next year.
you know, where we go next year, we'll have another opportunity.
And we're really getting to the point where we can give a real, true scholarship to help
Yeah.
with their tuition too, which is been one of the goals of Egypt for a really long time. But Nick has put us really in a financial position where we're at that place where we can actually start contributing directly to the cost of their education. So I think that's another huge bonus or boon for UGIC, is to finally cross that threshold to be able to help pay for someone to get an education in GIS.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm pretty
I guess
excited
on
about that.
What do you guys think of the cost? Because we did have to bump it up a little bit this year, and as all of you know, of everything going up in cost, it was really the food cost that really went up, and that's what it was, the per diem price and cost of food was just more. It was just more. So it wasn't like we were making more, we're actually kind of making the same. So just for you to know, that's what that bump was. I mean, hopefully it wasn't too noticeable with works and that, but just know it wasn't really, I think everything else was pretty good. Just the cost of food was just different.
What are your thoughts on the costs?
Crickets.
In other words, it was just right because nobody even noticed.
My request from here was still accepted, therefore the cost is less.
There you go.
I think for the cost of UGIC, it's probably one of the best bang for your bucks things here, where you get so much content, so much networking,
All the food.
you know, everything's a lot of taken care of, and so much good stuff here for really cheap, really, considering what you
Activities.
get
Plus we
everywhere else.
throw in entertainment.
And now we're going to have a cornhole tournament, so
Yeah.
look at that. So
Couldn't ask for more.
put your seatbelts on for that. Just one other initiative to mention that we work on, and then maybe we'll turn it to questions for the board, is Maps on the Hill. Who in here has participated in Maps on the Hill before? Quite a few of you, yeah. Most everybody, so I think most people are familiar with that, but we feel like that is just a great way to get GIS in front of decision makers at the state level there, to see what we do and help educate the value and power of GIS. It was interesting seeing Ralph Becker today as one who was in a position of a decision maker who really understood the power and the value of GIS and was able to make those decisions. And of course that helped Nick out immensely during the times that he was there, and all of us feel the same way. And so we feel like Maps on the Hill has been a great venue for us to be able to showcase what we do there, and so we continue to support that. And we feel like we had a really good showing and an event here just a couple months ago up at the Capitol.
You know, I think when I did a session on Monday for GIS managers, and it was like a 4-hour thing, and one of the questions that kind of came up, well, one of the things I was showing is, you got to have that support. Like I had Ralph as a support, I'd say actually like the director as a support, and sometimes you got to be able to, I think he made a pretty good sell of like how to sell it to get the support, and I think that's one of those things, like, it might help other groups across the
If
valley.
you build it, they will come.
Yeah, exactly right, because I think they appreciate it once they see it, and they'll financially support it,
I think that's also if there's any activities in your organization or opportunities to share the GIS knowledge, and especially if UGIC can help, let us know. I know Maps on the Hill is this main event, but maybe internally there's something going on that we can showcase some things, and we'd be willing to help out with those type of things also.
And that's a core part of UGIC's mission, and so, I mean, if there are ideas and things like that we can help with, we support GIS days, back to the education side of it, in the same way, with bus grants and things like that. So if there are local GIS days, there are 2 or 3 major ones that happen throughout the state each year that we support, but, events like that, that's a great thing for us to be able to talk about.
Curious too
So-
from you guys, like what do you, so like we're looking literally at making some amazing like money towards students, but what do you guys consider that as, part of the sponsorship of what we're doing at UJIC, What do you think is helpful for a student? Is it money? What is it? I mean, is it only money? Is it, to do something like that?
I think it's money and internship opportunities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And how much money is good? I mean, like, do you think like,
Whatever
to
you're
actually
thinking.
support it?
You just add a little bit to it.
And with that though, every little bit helps. Kids who are able to put together, I have a senior this year, if you can put together enough $500 scholarships, you can pay for school. And I mean, it's really nice to get the $5,000 ones,
Yeah.
and then not to, but if you can put together enough of those little ones, they make a difference.
Mhm.
Send them to the U because we are always begging students to apply.
Utah State gave them a full ride.
Literally for our department, we have to beg students to apply for our scholarships.
I have,
Oh.
I have two teenagers that won't apply. Both of them are brilliant, and I've got one she just got a 32 on her ACTs, and she has a 4.0. I'm like, just start applying. The money will come. Just start filling out the applications. She's like, maybe this summer. No, now.
Yeah, literally for our scholarships, and they are, they're in the department ones are 500 to a few thousand, is we have to beg students to apply.
So as somebody who was fairly recently a student, because I went back and I did the grad certificate program at Utah State, because it made more sense to me, for me at the time. Getting that knowledge about the scholarships out there and getting the knowledge about SLUG and UJIC to students, because I didn't find out about either of those things through school, only through somebody in my neighborhood who happens to do GIS, and he found out, oh, have you got signed up for these email lists, and then that's how I found an internship, and then, all of those things. I wasn't getting that information from schools, and I missed the scholarship cycle, just because of when I was, as a non-traditional student, I was on a different cycle, and so I missed all of those scholarships just because they only ran the traditional cycle. So that may be something to consider, would be doing ones in those off cycles instead of, oh, we only offer them, you have to apply in May and then they start in the fall. If they're off at all, then it just didn't work.
We have been talking a little bit about scholarships. One thing we haven't talked about is business posters. This was an idea that was floated by one of our university. He said, we want as many people that can to submit business posters of their organization to let us know a little bit about your organization and maybe have QR codes that they can go find out information about their organizations. You can see some examples out there. This is one of the first years that we've actually put these up. So if people want to put up business posters, then they're welcome to print them off and then send us a copy, and we can send those out to the UJIC community as well, or the universities, and say, hey, look, this is information about the university or this organization. They have internships available. So that was one of the things you had asked about.
About different employers and GIS.
Yeah.
You want them to give it to you as a hard copy or as a PDF?
If they want it displayed during the conference, a hard copy. But
It's gonna be
we're
a-
housing the PDFs
For
in our-
future use.
for future use, or to
Comprendo.
for the universities like U of U and Utah State and some of the other ones to be able to have that available for students to go look at.
Fantastic.
So that's another opportunity for students to learn more about the GIS community.
Perfect. Well, unless this is a panel where you guys have opportunities to ask questions, so unless there's anything else the UJIC board wants to mention first, I think we'll turn it to anyone out here who's got questions for us about what UJIC's doing,
Or suggestions?
We can
or
take it.
suggestions.
I don't know.
And we expect some kind of comment from Kevin. Is Kevin here by chance?
No?
Yes, he is. He's just in the back. He's hiding out in the back there, but.
My only comment is the board, as always, just does an exceptional job. And it doesn't matter who gets seated, because our community's so big.
Yeah, that was another comment I was going to make, to reiterate what he has said, is we have such a phenomenal community and
Such a group.
their willingness to present and to help out, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I would like to know who come up with the cornhole idea.
Melissa,
I think we'll give Melissa credit for that one.
that was her map as art.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and it just ended up that it was so popular,
We were all
started
playing
playing. And then we're like, we should make this an activity.
I think it's awesome.
So if you haven't signed up yet, go scan the QR code and we'll put all that together. And tonight during the social, we'll
And
have a
just so
big
you don't
tournament.
get KCRI as your partner.
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, yeah. If you,
I second that.
I think they're actually going to put. I think they're going to put Phoebe and I together just so that you know. Anyway, so that's right. Anybody playing against me is in more danger
Bound
of
to
getting
win.
hit by the thing that I'm throwing than losing to me. So,
You want Chris as your team.
yeah.
That's who you want.
Chris or
Or
Stan.
Stan.
Chris or Stan, the two ends is who you want.
Actually, I figured it out
Then
for
the next
Stan.
you want
You won't
passes.
do good unless you say, imagine it as a pickleball. Just like
And all of a sudden he sinks
And
it.
then all of a sudden, just right in the hole. It works. It's almost 100%. Pretty close.
See, like I do, and I always spectate at these events. Just go, I just like to watch everybody. Like, yeah, it's the funnest thing.
But yeah, questions, thoughts, comments for the UGIC board. This is your chance.
I'm just so happy to have people. Like I stopped meeting and I kept trying to like go over, and every time I'd want to go say hi to you, like you're like talking to somebody, I was like, the last time I saw you, you had a baby strapped to your chest.
And she's great.
Yeah, I've missed this community. It's
Yes,
nice
it's a
that we're
phenomenal
back
community.
together again.
You know, and
Really nice. Does my heart good.
And we're excited that the conference continues to grow. You know, we recognize that there are a few folks that probably haven't been able to attend this conference because they came in Bryce Canyon and they're only 6 months apart, which is why we're trying to get back onto the cycle again. But even with that, and even with COVID still being around, our attendance at this conference is almost exactly what our attendance at the Vernal conference 4 years ago was.
Interesting.
And so, I mean, within 5 people, not that close.
150, I think. -ish.
157, if you want to get right down to it.
Right now, is that who members? Oh, I think it's one.
Oh, that
So-
was.
That's in a person. There are several attending virtually
Oh, yeah.
on top of that.
Yeah, it's probably
So
That
there's
that
about a
does not
dozen
include
more.
the vendors, does it?
No, that includes the
Oh, it
vendors.
doesn't include the vendors. Okay.
And we were at 150, like 5 or 8 or something like that 4 years ago. So, yeah, but we actually are a little above that if you count the people who are, hi guys, who are watching on TV right now. So.
And I think as we come back to Vernal to this amazing facility, which for the first time this board is not stressed. We're not running around with our heads cut off trying to organize things.
So easy.
Mini
Golf's
golf
already
is
made.
already set up.
It's already set up.
It's just we have a phenomenal facility to come to here.
It's a
tonight,
good
which
place.
is great.
You know, we asked this question 4 years ago, and maybe we ought to ask this group. I mean, Vernal, should we continue to keep it in the rotation? Is this a worthwhile thing from what you've
It's
experienced?
a long ways away,
I mean, it's a ways
but
away.
I'm seeing a lot of head nods.
I think it's a great venue, but I still think there's a segment of the community that thinks Vernal it doesn't appeal to them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's too bad because this is an awesome.
It-
Oh my
I know.
God,
And
so
they
cool.
have some great stuff nearby
That's what I
too.
mean,
Oh,
it's an
yeah.
awesome place, but
So Kevin, would it help, I didn't go, but on Monday night, Jordan took these guys on a phenomenal hike. We have lots
Yes.
of pictures. Is maybe start, and we have taken a lot of pictures during the conference to create a photo collage of what Vernal really is.
Yeah,
Because
Look at all the fun we're having. Aren't you guys jealous?
I was with that group 4 years ago, and I came out here, and then I brought my family out a month later to have vacation and go to Dinosaur and everything. It's a phenomenal area, and I just don't think people realize it.
yeah, I think the photo collage is a good idea. And advertise it, yeah.
I think getting it out on Twitter or whatever the social media platform of choice would be now and moving forward tweeting out a bunch of stuff, both my account and sending it to the official UGRC account. Like we had a defined hashtag, and so people could see, oh, this is what a UGIP conference looks like. Like, oh my gosh, this is a really nice facility. And then as we're going on our adventures, like here's what I'm doing. Like last year at Bryce, I tweeted out some of these bike rides I did. I mean, here's my bike out in front of Bryce. Like, it's wow. Like, yes, sign me up. And if we could show that this is just as good as that.
Yeah. And maybe create a way that we could share our experiences as well.
Yeah.
Like somehow with the
It's good to keep it in the community, because here's a couple comments I had from 2 different people. Don't tell people about Rome. It's cool as like going to Moab, if people, and then Moab's gone, it's so full you can't even.
He's got to go in December.
They said, don't let the word out.
Fantastic in December.
Yeah. Only to the GIS community, nobody else.
Nobody else.
So we used to set a hashtag, we forgot about that. Jake, what hashtag are you using?
I've been using UGIP 2022.
That's what we put out there in the registration, just to say.
I don't know, because I think we should all
Twitter,
start.
so I'd have to give my pictures to you guys.
Well, we have a Google folder that's set up that we can have pictures go into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be showing them on Friday during this.
Have you ever hired a photographer for any of these events, just for some pushing out?
Not really.
Get some
We used to have some.
nice pictures and not just.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was probably
Okay, I've seen Kevin's pictures before. Kevin takes great pictures.
He does.
So one question I might have is, are there other places or venues that you know of that might have great facilities like this that can, and
That's the
things
hardest
to
part,
do?
is getting the facility
Yeah.
big enough for our group, that
And at a
we can
cheap enough
afford.
price.
Yeah, that we can afford it, but it's big enough. And really the best ones are like this, or where you can stay there as well, like Bryce, where you're in the building,
Yeah.
so you're always kind of there. I think it works much better because then you can talk and.
So if you can find a big enough hotel, right, that has a big area for a plenary and 4 breakout rooms, and then you can fill up the hotel for them, they give you the place for free, or nearly for free. And then you buy your food from them too, of course. So if you can find some place like that in the state that's like really cool like that, that's big enough, we could go try someplace else.
So if you ever hear of like a new facility that's been built or anything, please let us know, because I think we know most of them,
Yeah.
or at least the ones that we can afford and go to.
Yeah.
But
We
yeah,
haven't gone back to Moab, for example, because we don't have the
We
big
don't
enough
have
one.
space. And
We haven't been able to do Zion National Park, because even though they got that group of hotels right there at the mouth of the canyon, it's not, they don't have the facility for it.
But St. George must.
St. George does, but their Dixie Center was really expensive and had too many rules. We couldn't get in after hours and different things.
Things like
you know what
our
I mean?
mini golf.
This year, is that something that we think is going to continue going forward? Is that some?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question. So we got like DNR, right? Providing all the stuff for free and providing somebody to come and do it and everything. As soon as the DNR says, hey, this is too costly for us or something like that, all of a sudden it's over with. So, but so far,
Jen's a champion.
So
Jen is
we should
fantastic.
thank her.
Yeah, already.
Yeah, you're gonna have to convince Tommy of it's worth it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because he tears his hair out about it. He did it. Yeah.
otherwise
Well-
you go back to putting it on a phone, right?
Yeah.
And you try to do it with a phone. That sucks.
Yeah.
I will say, it is nice as a presenter, if you get on the broadcast one, it's nice to have that record, like that YouTube, that you can I know the one I did last time, I've sent it to people who have questions about doing GIS fires, like, oh, here, I just did a 45-minute presentation on that, I don't have to talk to you, watch this first and then come talk.
Then come back.
So that's kind of a nice, little resume, link. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's worth all the.
Well, we need to balance that part out. As of 3 weeks ago, we had 3 virtual attendees signed up for this conference, and in the last week we had almost a dozen. And so, all of a sudden we've got a good bunch of folks that are watching online. And so we'll have to kind of balance that and see. But yeah, we're glad that we're able to offer that for those that can, because those that are watching online are grateful we're doing it this year. So.
We actually had somebody show up today who said, I really want to come to the classes, but I just got tested positive for COVID. And so we gave them the virtual links, and so they're watching virtually right now. So.
Yeah.
And good for him for not coming.
Yeah.
Spreading it.
Yeah.
And there might be some organizations that say, we can send this many people, but they want to have someone else that can watch it virtually too. So from that standpoint, it's kind of nice.
But the logistics is, it takes a lot of work, and you get one room. Can you imagine if we multiplied it by 4? Well, we got 4 tracks. Let's do 4 systems. She's like, oh, that ain't happening.
Multiply Jen just broke into tears over there.
Tommy can do it.
Yeah, it's like, because then you go from like free DNR to like $1,000 a day at least.
Right.
Someone else, so.
Oh yeah, and then that's where it is. So I think we've got just a minute or two left. So if you're dying to ask a question, this is your chance. I think we can only take like 1 or 2 more, and then we'll be at the end of the session.
So was there a place in Brigham City? Did somebody say there was a place?
There's a conference center.
Okay.
We'll discuss it. We're just getting a feel for what people thought about that. But other questions?
All I can say is we can't thank you enough for weathering the storm as well as you have. I mean, it's
well,
it was hard, but it worked.
Well, and none of that works without the good community that we've got. I mean, that's as simple as it can be.
It's the community.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've talked to people who have said, well, I kind of want to present, but I'm so nervous to present. And I'm going to this UGIC conference for the first time, and I'm like, oh, you don't even have to worry about it. This is not a place where people are, uptight or worried about things. It's such a good community. It is such a good place, and everybody helps each other out. And that's a great thing. And so that's the thing that really helps us weather the storm. When we say, okay, we have to bump the conference 4 different times, and we got to make it virtual, all of you are just like, all right, we're on board. We're all doing this together, and that's what makes it happen. So maybe what we ought to do is let's end this session with us clapping for everybody out there. We should do that.
There isn't a conference without attendees.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thanks you guys. We appreciate you coming in. Thank you. Okay. All right. Onward and upward.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is the 220 session, and we are in the Split Mountain 2 room. So we've got 2 presenters today, both from UGRC. So AGRC is an old habit. First up is Eric Newman. He's doing leveraging OpenStreetMap statewide data. And then following Eric, I'll just introduce him now to save time, is Jacob Adams, Ditch the Cursor, Editing with Spatially Enabled Data Frames. Okay.
All right, thank you. Yeah, welcome to the afternoon doubleheader from UGRC. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. So today I'll talk about a new data layer that we've put into our statewide database called Open Source Places. I'll talk a little bit about the big picture, why we created the data and some uses for it, and then talk about a little bit more detail and data quirks that you might encounter, and then how the data is built through a Python script, so it's fully automated and refreshes frequently, and then how you can participate by adding data through OpenStreetMap edits. So the new layer is called Open Source Places. And as I mentioned, it's one of the newest additions to our statewide Geographic Information Data Source, or SGID. And the intent is to represent places of interest within the state of Utah as a point data layer. And this layer is tailored a little bit more toward businesses and community locations. We were trying to minimize the overlap with the GNIS place names layer, which is, so that's the Geographic Names and Information Systems, something like that, USGS I believe maintains. That's focused a little bit more on natural features, but does also have some community locations like fire stations, post offices, churches, and things like that. But we tried to deconflict the two a little bit. This layer is built and curated from OpenStreetMap data, and there's currently nearly 24,000 features statewide. We update it frequently. Right now we're doing it every other week. So if you make edits in OpenStreetMap, they'll quickly get into this data set. And it's always growing because the OpenStreetMap community is very active, and there's been over 400 new features in the first 2 months that we've had this data out. It is a derivative product of OpenStreetMap though, so it carries the OSM license, which is the Open Database License 1.0. And if you derive data from our data set, then you would also need to carry through that license for this data, or your data. So what exactly is in there? Well, pretty much anything you find in OpenStreetMap, you'll find in this data set. Businesses ranging from banks to restaurants, car dealerships, hotels. There's also campgrounds, parks, different shops and attractions, churches, schools. And here's a snapshot from 400 South in Salt Lake City. You can see a mixture of all those things. There's restaurants, a salon, tattoo shop, music shop, eye clinic, an Intermountain clinic, Jiffy Lube, a church, coffee shop, Office Max. So there's a little bit of everything in here, which is cool to have all that data in one spot. When you look at the data by category, the most popular category is actually just building, which implies that there's opportunities to improve the data because you can enhance it by adding more useful categories. But otherwise, you got a lot of restaurants, churches, parks, fast food, all the way down to things like hairdressers, post offices, do-it-yourself stores that still have hundreds of features in the data. And this is just a snapshot of the top 25 most popular categories. And then when you look at it by county, most of the OpenStreetMap data is dominated by where the people live and where the editors are making edits. So Salt Lake and the Wasatch Front counties have thousands of features, whereas some of the smaller counties, central Utah, northern Utah, eastern Utah, may only have a few hundred features. So those are areas ripe for new additions and additional editing as well. The motivation for why we created this data was originally born out of the idea to have a common places layer for 911 purposes and for dispatchers to help locate callers. So oftentimes a call will pop up on a dispatcher screen, and the caller may not know the exact address where they are, but they may say, I'm near Black Bear Diner or a hotel, or in this case there's actually a McDonald's hidden under this red box because there's two features right there. But that helps them locate a caller when an address may not be available. But we quickly realized there were other uses and reasons to create the data. One is to make OpenStreetMap data more accessible. It's a little bit esoteric. You have to search through APIs or plugins to download data, often directly from OpenStreetMap. So this makes it a little easier. And then we can also try to encourage the growth of OpenStreetMap and therefore the growth of this data set within the state of Utah. And then we also wanted to blend some of our data with OpenStreetMap data in order to enhance it. And then I think this is the first time we have a layer where users can directly contribute to it. Anyone's edits can get into our data set this way. All right, so how can the data be used? Well, we think there are a number of uses for anyone out there, citizens, researchers, government agencies. You can do things like analyze business types or even specific businesses. So what cities have a high fast food to population ratio, for example, or how many beans and brews are within a half mile of a Starbucks. And I'll kind of use this beans and brews analogy in a couple places. But so here I did a SQL query where I pulled out the beans and brews and the Starbucks, calculated the distance between them, and sorted them. And there are a few that are very close, like this one's only 100 meters apart. It's at the airport, which makes sense that they would be so close in that scenario. But you can also, so I mentioned the 911 use before. You can also do analysis of community locations. So things like tobacco regulation laws require tobacco shops are a certain distance from schools, churches, playgrounds, daycares, and that sort of thing. A lot of that data lives in this data set. So it could be a good starting point for that type of analysis. And then we have also considered using it to quality control other data sets that we maintain that might have missing or closed locations. So things like schools, fire stations, and liquor stores, among many others. So a little bit of other info about the data. There are some similarities to other layers in the SGID. Things like places may be present in other data sets like schools and libraries, fire stations, as I mentioned before. And it's also available in the same ways all of our other data is. Arcgis Online, Open Data, our cloud, Open SGID database, and then through services and downloads in a variety of formats. The differences are this isn't authoritative data just due to the nature of crowdsourced data itself. It carries a different data license, as I mentioned before. And then again, we think the coolest aspect is any user can contribute to this data set. And I'll talk about that as we go on. So some of the main data attributes here, we do carry through an OpenStreetMap ID if you want to link it to OpenStreetMap for any reason. There's a broad category of what the place represents. The name of the place, very important for making this data useful. And then there are some additional category fields as well. If there's an amenity provided, if it's a restaurant, there's a cuisine field that could be provided. And then if it's tourism related or a shop, what type of goods it sells. So typically the broader category will include some of the information in these other fields here. All right, so some of the quirks in the data. You can expect some typos. Obviously, it's all data that is input by humans. Humans occasionally have typos and put typos in their data. You may also see occasionally a missing or a closed location, and that may just be the case that an editor hasn't caught the change and made an edit in OpenStreetMap. Those are good locations to make edits on your own. And you may see some naming differences. So back to our beans and brews example. OpenStreetMap prefers to have the name on the sign represented in the data as the name of the feature. So for example, Beans and Brews Coffee House However, you may see an ampersand or you may see an and spelled out. And in some cases, coffee house may be left off or it may be combined into one word. So just something to be cognizant if you're using the data. Be creative with definition queries, so use wildcards to your advantage. So this wildcard search will capture all of the beans and brews, regardless of casing and spelling. And then, as I mentioned before, several locations just have a category of building, which isn't especially helpful if you're trying to sort the data by different data types. So those are all good candidates to make edits on your own. There's also a very European flavor. Note the spelling here in OpenStreetMap data. It was based out of London in the UK, so you'll see English spelling or European style in a lot of the category names. So things like center and theater will end in RE. You may see chemist instead of pharmacy, or tire shop spelled with a Y. Just little quirks like that to be aware of as well. And then in this data set, we have 2 different address fields, so there may be up to 2 addresses provided. One of them is straight from the OpenStreetMap data, but we found that only about 25% of the data has an address provided. And then we also calculate a UGRC address, which we pull in the address from the nearest address point in our statewide database if it's within 25 meters. So that may not be an authoritative address for that location, but it's going to get you very close and give you, obviously a human address or a human readable address on top of just the shape or the lat long. And we have about almost 60% of the data has an address that way. So most of the data will have an address. Okay, so a little bit about how the data is built. It's completely automated through a Python script. It basically starts by pulling an OpenStreetMap archive that's downloaded. It's archived every night from this company called GeoFabric out of Germany. They do downloads and archives on multiple geographic scales. That download gives you 18 different shapefiles shown here. And a lot of OpenStreetMap data can be represented either as a single point, like a McDonald's can just be represented as a point, or it could be a polygon representing the footprint of that McDonald's building. So you'll see like POIs, this is points of interest, and then points of interest A, that's the area version, so you've got both points and polygons. So basically we try to combine all of this data, or several of these data sets, into a single layer, a single point layer. And we start by filtering it down to certain categories that we think would be useful for this data set, and then only features that have information in the name field. If there's nothing in the name field, it's really not very helpful for searching for it for our original purpose. And then we convert the polygon features into internal centroids so that they're going to be simplified into a point feature. And as we append data sets together, there's a spatial filtering that goes on to try to avoid duplicates getting in from that McDonald's point or footprint scenario that I mentioned. So we start with the points of interest, then add in the area version or the centroids of them, then the places of worship is POFW, and then the area version of those, then some transportation areas. And these are largely like airports, helipads, train stations, that kind of thing. And then finally the buildings layer gets added in at the end. And then we also add additional attributes based on our SGID polygon data. So we add the county, city, zip, and census block, or the block ID. And then we add the addresses, as I mentioned before, particularly the UGRC addresses this way. And then finally, there are some additional attributes. So when you download the GeoFabric data, there's only a couple of attributes that you get. You get the name, the category, and not much else. But what we do is we pull additional OpenStreetMap attributes through their Overpass API, which exposes the full data set to you. We pull that into a Pandas data frame and then join it to the working feature class using the OpenStreetMap ID as the join ID. And so that brings in attributes like the amenity, the cuisine, tourism, and shop fields. And then we also grab a website. Again, these are all if it's available in OpenStreetMap. Website, phone, and then the open hours for the location, if that applies. And then the final part of the script, we do some additional data cleanup in order to prevent duplication of features. So the first one is based on the name and the block ID field, and we use the block ID, the census block, like a spatial index, and we combine the name and the block ID into a single lowercase string, and then throw that in a Python list. And then as we iterate through the data, if that same string appears again, then we just delete the second and subsequent occurrences of it. And this prevents two features from the same census block from getting into the same data, or into the data if it has the same name. So like this Center for the Arts showed up both probably as a point and as a polygon in the data set. And this duplicate check removes one of them, so we're not adding duplicates needlessly. And then finally, there's a removal of short and numeric dominated names. And when we do this check, we remove the word or building out of the string. And then if the length of the name field is less than 3 characters, we remove it. Or if the name is more than 50% numeric characters, we remove it. And that prevents things like apartment buildings. So like building 35 isn't going to be a useful place of interest in this data set. So that filters that out. And then there's also just house numbers get in there as a building name, and those aren't particularly useful either. So next, how can you participate? It's pretty easy. You can really just sign up for OpenStreetMap. There's a sign up button. All you need is an email address, and then I'm going to try to just go off script real quick and make an edit. I noticed I'm staying at the Dino Inn, and there's a skate shop, or sorry, a bike and skate shop right next door that's not in the OpenStreetMap data. So you can click edit once you're logged in, zoom into the location of interest, and when you log in the first time, it presents a little bit of a walkthrough on how to use these tools, which can be helpful. So I'll just add a point. It's on the side of this Italian restaurant building. I'm going to add a bicycle shop. Happens to be right there. It's called Grail Cycle and Skate. I'm going to use the ampersand because that's what the website and the sign show. And in this case, I'm just going to add the website, and it's got the bike shop category. That's all I'm going to do right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a save. Say I added a bike shop, so the comment gets in there. And typically these edits are going to go live in OpenStreetMap within minutes from what I've seen, very quick. So maybe I'll just go back to it at the end and see if it's been pulled in already. All right, so that's how you can make an edit that quickly and that easily in OpenStreetMap. And I use the ID browser, which is just the web-based browser that is the default. There are some desktop and mobile apps. JOSM is a desktop Java OpenStreetMap editor is what it stands for. That's kind of more for power users. You can make edits more quickly and kind of a higher volume. So check those out if you're interested. There's also a pretty active OpenStreetMap community that maintains a calendar of events, including there's a Utah group in Salt Lake City that's pretty active. I think they're meeting tonight for like a mapathon type event at a coffee shop actually. And then there's also a Slack community that anyone can join, and there's a local Utah channel within that with Utah-centric both events and questions and things like that. So I'll skip through that because we did a demo. There's one other way you can participate. There's a platform called Map Roulette. It's like a gamified version of OpenStreetMap editing where it serves up micro tasks for users to make edits and then move on to the next task, and it'll randomly present to you. So those tasks are organized into challenges, and I have created a challenge for improving building attributes in Utah that you can check out. And the goal of this is to improve those categories where it's building was just the main category. So adding in these 4 fields specifically that we pull into our data set will help improve that data and ensure like the bike shop category comes through instead of just a building category in the future. So when you do Map Roulette, you just start a challenge. Say you want to edit that challenge. It presents you with a feature to edit. You make your edits and save it. And then you basically say, I fixed it, or it wasn't an issue, whatever the case may be. And then you put in a comment, and then Map Roulette serves up another task for you to look at. And so I've already loaded buildings that don't have additional tags into this challenge, so anyone could go in there and improve the data that way. Or you can just make edits in OpenStreetMap and add missing features as well. So that's pretty much all I have. Go out there and explore the data. Participate in OpenStreetMap. Data will get loaded into our data set within 2 weeks when we run the script, and just have fun. If you're interested, we've got a data page on this data set and then a blog post introducing it as well. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thanks.
I got a question.
Sure.
What was that Map Roulette?
If you go to I think it's just maproulette.org, or just search Map Roulette and it'll be the first thing that comes up.
Okay, and that was your specific challenge?
Yeah, sorry, the challenge, let me go back, is right there. 26,977. You can you can also search by geographic location. When you zoom in, I think it gives you specific challenges for that area. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Eric, I've got a handful of questions of which you may or may not be able to answer. But are other states adopting open streets?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. This appears rather unique. That's all.
Yeah.
In that regard. Second, does the NENA 911 standard support that common places nomenclature?
So I think there's a layer, I think there is a common places layer in there. It's not one of the primary layers that you're going to be geocoded or calls get geocoded off of.
I can see how it'd be helpful.
But I think there's an ancillary layer, and we've added this into the Motorola map that dispatchers have for our state.
Third question. ZVAC
Sorry, Jake.
and stories of buildings. Any thoughts on adding those? Because it'd be an interesting way to add the
So
NENA component to your...
OpenStreetMap does have tags that you can add for the number of levels in a building. And so you could say if you're in a shop on the 13th floor, I think you can specify that either in the unit field or for apartments, there's a tag for the number of floors specifically.
Great. Thanks very much.
Yep. Try to get out of here.
Okay. Thanks, Eric.
Yep. Thank you. Let's see if I can unplug. Do you need the converter, Jay?
Okay, I guess we won't get full screen. Alrighty, how y'all doing? My name is Jake Adams. I'm the second half of the UGRC doubleheader today. I should start my timer. And I want to talk about ditching the cursor and instead editing your feature class and your spatial data with the spatially enabled data frames. So to start off, I want to ask, who here has used Pandas before? Just a handful of people. Fantastic. What we're going to do is we're going to give a brief overview of what Pandas is, what you can do with it, and then we'll show how we can use the spatially enabled data frames to use that to edit our feature class data. So I believe we're probably all fairly familiar. Come on. We're all probably pretty familiar with ArcPy. If you've done any programming, any Python work in ArcGIS, you've used ArcPy. And ArcPy is really great. It gives us a lot of features, gives us a lot of capability, but it's based around kind of that tool model. You have feature class, it goes in, you do something, you get a feature class out. And it also has a couple other limitations. One of the big ones, if you're using cursors to edit your data, you have to access each field by its index in a list. And 6 months later, when you go back to look at your code, you're like, what is row 0? I have no idea what row 0 is. You look at this and you say, where row 1 equals row 2, and you're like, huh? And code is read way more frequently than it is written. Readability is a huge deal in code because readable code is code you can parse quickly and easy and find bugs. So, problem 1, it's hard to figure out what fields you're using in a cursor. Problem 2, transferring data between data sets. If you've ever taken a census CSV and joined it to a feature class, you've got a gazillion fields that you don't care about. You just want that one value, but you've got to sort through all those different ones. It's even worse if you're using cursors. You've got to use nested cursors and do a condition to see if you should transfer it over. It gets a little cumbersome. So problem 3, renaming and reordering fields. If you've ever tried to use ArcPy to rename the fields in a feature class, you've got to go through this field mapping. You've got to go field by field by field. Admittedly, this was code I wrote a couple of years ago, so there may be a more streamlined way to do this now, but it's still kind of a pain. And again, readability. I'm going to keep harping on that. Readability counts. So finally, we hit on it earlier, ArcPy deals with intermediate feature classes. And so when you're getting data out of ArcPy, oftentimes you're going to have a script that looks like this, and you've got a gazillion different intermediate feature classes. If you're writing those out to disk, it takes time. You can save some time by going in using the in-memory workspace, but it's still going to be a little bit of a headache for you. So let's enter the pandas. This is going to be a brief overview. Roger Dunn is going to give what will probably be a more in-depth overview on Friday. But pandas you can think of as the Python version of Excel or spreadsheets, except so much more. It does so much more. It's amazing. But it works off this idea of a data frame. And this is the canonical way to import it. Import pandas as PD, and then we just read in a CSV. And again, super easy to read in a CSV, one line of code. No CSV writers, no messing with headers, it's all there. And pandas works off the idea of columns and rows, and every column and every row has a label. So for example on this, these are the labels for each column. Now these rows have row labels as 0, 1, 2, 3, which is the order you see them in. But it's important to remember that those are labels. I could easily reorder this and it would go 0, 3, 2, 1. So those are labels, they're not necessarily indices. So where that matters is when we go to access individual rows, columns, and elements using .loc and .iloc. .loc uses a row label and a column label, where iloc uses a row index and a column index. So, for example, we take our data frame and we say, I want rows 0, 1, 2, and 5. And I'm passing in a list. You can either pass in a list of labels or a single label. So I'm passing a list of rows and a single string, a single column label, and I get, this is what Pandas calls a series. This is a one-dimensional vector, if you know that language. So you see we've got rows 0, 1, 2, and 5, and just the county field or attribute. iloc gives us indices, and this you can use Python slicing just like you would if you're accessing elements in a list. So here I'm saying give me rows 10 through 14 because it's slicing, and from the beginning to number 4 to column number 4. And so you can very quickly and easily get a slice of your data. So one thing that we're doing often a lot is we only want a handful of columns. We load in a huge data set, it's got a ton of extraneous data, let's just focus on a couple. Well, if we just skip the .loc and .iloc and just use the data frame and the bracket, we can then pass it a single label or a list of labels to get just those columns. So that's all rows that meet those columns. Now I'm using .head here, which just prints the first 5, but you can see how we're getting just those 2 columns that we want. So that's kind of a brief overview of Pandas, and to dive a little bit more into Pandas, I also want to talk about the Arcgis API for Python and their spatially enabled data frames. So this comes, when I think ArcGIS API for Python, I often think working with AGLE data, right? Working with portal data, moving data around. But hidden in there are these spatially enabled data frames. They basically give you a geometry type for your data frame and a bunch of spatial operations that you can use. So this is the way we import it. You don't actually use these, but what these do is they put this .spatial submodule into the panda.dataframe, pd.dataframe.spatial, and then there's a bunch of different things. So here we're just reading in a feature class from the OpenSGID using an SDE connection. And then I'm just printing it out, and here you can see this is the first 5 rows of our authoritative county boundary set. You can see we've got the geometry column right there. That says a JSON string, so you can pull those into ArcPy geometry objects if you want to get down and dirty with the geometries. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. So one of the, taking this data set, we can combine iloc and .loc with conditional statements. You can kind of think of these as where clauses to really narrow down exactly what data you want to look at. So let's get all the counties that use the central state plane coordinate system. So I say .loc, and then I pass it counties df state plane equals central. Note that we're kind of duplicating that right there. It goes into what Python or what Pandas is doing under the hood, but you do have to duplicate it there. And then I just want these few columns, and there you go. Those are the, I think there's 13 central state plane coordinate systems. So notice I just said I think there's 13. Well, what if we could figure out? Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. You can easily add columns. If you try to reference a column that does not exist and you want to assign something to it, it will just automatically create it. Now, I'm a little power hungry. I want to be the emperor of all of the counties in Utah. So I just say counties df emperor equals Jake, and there we go. So you may now all bow to me. I will accept your taxes. It'd be fantastic. And if you look at the data set, if you look at the data set, there's the column. So it's official. But like I was saying, I think there was 13 state plane, but Pandas has some really powerful built-in aggregation and kind of summary tools. And you can kind of think of these as the spreadsheet equivalent of the symbolized by unique values classification when you're making a map. So let's take those counties, let's group them by state plane and count how many values are in each column. So you can see, oh, yep, we have 13, 8, and 8. Now over here you see these zeros, and that's because there's no data in those columns. So if I wanted to very quickly get a number for each one of these, I'd just choose a field that I knew had values for each row, and I'd call a count on that, and there are the total number of values in that category. Now we can also do some spatial work. So I want an acres field in this. So I'm going to take the shape column, which holds that geometry. I'm going to apply this function that divides the shape area, and that comes from the spatially enabled data frame, and divide it by the conversion factor to go from square meters to acres, and assign that to the acres field. And then I'm going to group by state plane. I'm going to take that acres column, and I just want to sum it. So I can see that it uses scientific notation here, but I can see the total number of acres in each state plane system in the state. This can be very powerful if you've got an attribute that you want to summarize by some grouping. And this is really just scratching the surface of what you can do here. So we talked about some problems with Pandas. So let's talk about with ArcPy. So let's talk about how we can use Pandas to make those problems a little bit easier and a little bit quicker. So the unknown index problem, what is this problem? Well, with Pandas, because we're using names, this becomes really easy. So Eric, I'm going to throw you a bone. You're going to now be the emperor of the small counties that use the state plane north coordinate system. So we do a .loc to get the counties that have a population less than 100,000 and where the state plane equals north, and for the emperor column, we'll assign it to Eric. And then this just sets a handful of columns that we want to see, sorts it and print it out. So you can see Beaver, that's in central, that stays mine. Or excuse me, that's in south. Box Elder, congratulations, you're now the emperor of Box Elder. I worked at Cache for a while, so you can't have that, that's mine. Carbon, that stays mine, but congratulations, you can now go fishing anytime you want. I hear the fishing's fantastic up there in Daggett. So, there you go. And imagine you would have had to iterate with cursors through an entire data set just to get those conditions, and yeah, we did it in one statement of code. So problem 2, joining data. Pandas has really powerful merging tools. So we're going to take some census data, we're going to load this in again from the OpenSGID, and I want to join that census data to our county boundaries. Well, I'll just take the county data frame and I'll merge it with the census data frame, but I'm only going to pass in these 2 columns, because if you've ever loaded a census CSV, there's about a gazillion columns that, yeah, blow your mind. Well, I just want those 2, and I say join it on this column and this column, so you can have discrete column names, and you can see if we scroll over, there's our GeoID and area land. So it's all there, it's all joined, no big problems there. Finally, renaming reindexing. This is, again, really slick with Pandas. Now, Emperor is a little too bold. It's not exactly political correct, so we'll use benevolent dictator for life. You know, that's more palatable for you guys, right? You don't mind bowing down to that. So I just define a dictionary that is the old column name to the new column name, and then I call .rename on my data frame, passing in that dictionary, and you can see I've got county name, last population, and if we scroll over here, benevolent dictator for life. So it makes it really easy to rename. Yeah?
Same thing with data types?
You can convert data types.
Yeah, you would create a new column, and I think it's .as type. And yeah, you could convert your ints to strings or try and cast your strings to ints or however you want to do that. So, yeah. And if you want to reorder them, you know, if you've ever tried to reorder columns in a file geodatabase, it's painful. Well, I define a list of the columns I want. I call reindex, passing in that list, and there is just those columns in that order I want in one new data frame. So I've subsetted, I've renamed, and I've reordered all in just a few steps, bada bing, bada boom. And you'll note, we haven't written out a single feature class to GeoDatabase yet. We haven't had to worry about in-memory, scratch spaces, anything like that. It's all right there. We just have a handful of new variable names. Now, as long as you're not like making multiple copies of a massive data set, pretty sure most of our computers can handle multiple copies of this in memory, and it's very fast, very efficient. So finally, we've got it all done. Let's write it out to disk. And just as there was a .from feature class, there's a .to feature class. I write it out to a temp file. Oh, you don't get to see the results.ping. What you would see here is an ArcGIS Pro screenshot showing our new fields and our new labels. So I'm not sure why that didn't show up, but nevertheless, there we go. There's even more, though. What would you pay? $19.95? $10.95? How about more? I'll never make it on late night TV. I'm sorry. Spatial joins. Pandas makes it really easy to do spatial joins with the ArcGIS API for Python and their spatially enabled data frames. So I've got some centroids and I've got some walkshed polygons, and I want to figure out for each point what walkshed does it belong to. So I just take the points and I do a spatial join with the walksheds, and I say left, which means I want to go point by point by point, and I say within, so what walkshed is it within? And now each point would have the additional columns from the walkshed area that it belongs to. So this is basically summarize within, but very fast, very easy, and you can run it multiple times in a script and your Python code won't fail, because that's a bug and Esri hasn't fixed it and it's bugging me. So here's how you do it in Pandas. You can also update ArcGIS Online data. This is something we do a lot, where we pull in CSVs from a client or another group, and they need it to update data that's in Eagle. Well, we just get the feature layer item. We convert it, or we create a feature layer object from that item. We pull the data frame, pull the data out as a data frame. We do something to it, and then we just call .edit features, passing in that data frame as a feature set, and bada bing, bada boom, we're off to the races. So I know I've thrown a ton at you. We've gone really fast, but there are a lot of really great resources out there. The official docs, the Pandas docs, they've got a really great in-depth, what am I trying to say here? Really great in-depth guide and introduction and tutorial. The ArcGIS API for Python, the reference, they're kind of buried, so you kind of have to dig into the features. And these slides will be available online. I'll show you a link where you can get these, and also Eric's slides as well. Eric also gave a great presentation 2020, intro to Pandas. Roger Dunn is giving a presentation on Friday morning again, so go check that out. I've got 2 projects here so you can see some actual example code that kind of works. The first one is updating Eagle data with data frames. That's the impetus for that example I showed you. And then there's also this housing unit inventory that I've been working with the folks at WFRC on. That so much Pandas, I mean, that was why I decided to give this talk, because I've done this so much. I'm like, wow, this really opened my eyes to everything that Pandas could do. So if you ever want to get a hold of me, there's my email. And if you go to gis.utah.gov/presentations, you can see these slides, you can see Eric's slides, and hopefully everything else that we've ever given. We're still trying to populate everything. But that is how you ditch the cursor and use Esri's ArcGIS API for Python to do a lot of the editing tools, the tasks that you may have done with ArcPy before, but will really make your life easier and make your code a lot more robust and easy to read. So thanks for sticking with us. This has been the Doubleheader. Have a great day. And I don't know, I probably got time if you've got questions. Otherwise, you can come hit me up. We've got our booth over in the vendor showcase. So.
Good job, you guys. Very good job.
Yeah.
we good? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Barragona. I work for the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And today I will be talking about using spatial analysis to prioritize land areas, is for lack of a better term. So just a little bit about me and my kind of credentials for giving this presentation. So in my capacity as a GIS analyst at FFSL, I worked on the shared stewardship prioritization project, which I could talk about for a long time, in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. I've done some prioritization with the Utah Forest Action Plan, and then I recently finished my Master's of Natural Resources, and the title of my capstone being Prioritizing Fuel Breaks Using Spatial Analysis in Utah's Wildland-Urban Interface. So I've done this, but disclaimer, I am not a statistician, I am not a data scientist, I am like a GIS analyst who really prefers cartography. So what I would say, take kind of this is going to be a broad overview of kind of some tools, something to think about, a little fuel for thought when you're kind of going about your work. So, quick outline. We're going to talk about prioritization as a concept. I'll go through some of the methods, some of the outcomes, some use cases I kind of made up that we can potentially spark some ideas, and a little bit of motivation. So, first, why prioritize? There's so many projects that we all have. A lot of us work for the government, so we have a lot of work to do without many resources to do it. Whether those resources are money, time, or personnel, or some combination, or all three, that's, how are we supposed to get all the things done that we need to get done? I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling that pressure. This is a lot of this presentation, and my work is geared toward land management in particular, but this could be applied on a smaller scale to more on a city, county level. So I apologize for my kind of bias toward land management, but so we have to figure out where to spend these like finite resources. And this also helps avoid the low-hanging fruit tendencies that we often tend to have. Places that are just easiest to get to, or we know the people who work there, or it's like, well, I like going there to do that work. And that's not necessarily the most effective use of our time and money and personnel. I actually, talking to some of the Forest Service land managers and district rangers, and they literally said they go for the low-hanging fruit to meet their quotas. And it's like, well, that's what we're trying to do better work in the right places. Also, data-driven decision-making is hot. I was like, I'm going to just find some graphics. There was just like millions of graphics about data-driven decision-making. And we're data rich as a society right now. There's like no end to how much data that we have at our fingertips. And so being able to use this data to then talk to management, talk to leadership in a way that makes sense and can get your ideas across can be really powerful. And also, all this data, that is not the same as information. So we need to repackage this, these massive tables into something that we can look at and just oh, that's where we need to do the work. It's nice and green. So, the little roadmap of prioritization. I'm going to say priority and prioritize and prioritization 1,000 times. So I apologize. There's not a lot of synonyms. So first off, what's the problem? When you're kind of thinking about the grand problem you're trying to solve,
in your prioritization framework. Kind of the main question with the GIS would be, like, where do we do the work? Where are we doing this thing? And then what data do we need? Which data will help us tell our story? Do we need 1 layer? Do we need 2? Do we need 15? And important in that kind of consideration for data is, who are our stakeholders that we're trying to appease? Is it just within your organization? Is it the landowners that you're working around and with? Is it, I don't know, anyone else who might look at your final product and go, well, what about us? You know, like, why weren't we considered in this? So it's nice to kind of build that into your process already. So you can say, well, actually, there are no endangered, like, snails who live here, so we're good. We checked. What data are available? Do you have to go find some more? Do you have to go collect it? Do you have to go call the guys at the UGRC and, like, ask them for it? Is it all projected in the right way? I've run into issues and it's all over the place. Are they the right size? Are they the right scale? Are there gaps? You know, you need like a complete product to really get meaningful results. And then how do we combine these data? Like, what units are we talking about? Are we talking about percent cover? Are we doing a presence absence? Are we just doing a straight count? Do we need to normalize the data? Is it vector data? Is it raster data? Is it both? Like, how are we gonna, like, make these all work together to make sense in a way that we can present to people that they'd understand and, like, kind of buy into? And then finally, what conclusions can we make with this data? It's like, does it pass the red face test? When you look at your final map and you see those areas lighting up, do you look at it and go, oh yeah, that makes sense? Or you go like, ooh, something went wrong here. Let's go back and revisit. And do we need to weight our parameters? Like, maybe something's like really skewing our results because it's just kind of overwhelming everything, but we don't really care about it as much. We'll talk about it a little later. But for the most part, we're gonna live in this, can we combine data for this presentation? And that's, you know, what we do as analysts anyway. We're manipulating the data. So, in a nutshell, spatial prioritization is just using a bunch of layers and, you know, mashing them together. It's the bread and butter of GIS. If you've ever taken a GIS class, which I know most of us probably have, like these suitability kind of like analyses, it's pretty much a prioritization, but that's a little, it's in the same vein. And so we're stacking layers to show where multiple things coexist within your area of interest. You can do this where things are. You can do this where things are not. But ideally, you might have a more nuanced approach to your priorities, not just if it's there or not. So, for example, it's like in your mind's eye, you're like, want to find a location, you're a land conservation agency, and you want a place that has some surface water, some tree cover, minimal encroachment by major roads, and contains elk and deer habitat. So like, oh yeah, I can see it. It's like this beautiful stream between these aspen groves, like in the middle of the forest. And you run your analysis and a golf course lights up. You're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. We're not gonna buy this golf course for our conservation purposes. So by prioritizing the layers within your prioritization, you can kind of account for things like that using whatever parameters you have available. And so when you're doing this kind of layered approach, you're not using raw data in your final analysis. We're going to do a relative scale within your area of interest. And so I'm going to show you just a quick example from shared stewardship, and I'm going to keep coming back to it because I use it a lot. So for Utah shared stewardship with the Forest Service, we're trying to prioritize where to do landscape scale restoration work and forest management work on Forest Service property for the most part, that tackles the issue of wildfire in Utah. So so we wanted to find areas to do work that had meaningful surface drinking water, that were susceptible to fire with their hazardous fuels, and have things that are at risk, buildings, critical infrastructure type stuff. So using, so we have this water layer, but we didn't just want to say, is there surface water here? Because there is surface water in a lot of, especially Forest Service properties. They have all the treed mountainous areas in Utah. So what we did is we kind of prioritized those in a way that made areas that have these surface water protection zones that take up a big chunk of that, like a % cover of the watershed, as well as population served. So, in this like kind of snapshot, this is, the Wasatch Front, Wasatch Back, and it makes sense that those areas are lighting up as our highest priority. These are like the highest priority watersheds for surface drinking water in the state with our analysis, because they serve a lot of people. We're less concerned about protecting those watersheds that's, maybe serve as a well for HOA out in the woods. Like, yeah, it would still be bad, but 7 people compared to 700,000 people served is, again, prioritizing. Same with hazardous fuels. So now you can kind of see it's a little bit different. Wasatch Front still lights up real hot. There's a lot of hazardous fuels. There's not a lot of work that's been done out there. It's really steep. It's hard to get to. There's a lot of politics. So it's a lot of really dense forest out there. And it's susceptible to burn, and it's susceptible to burn badly. And our strategic protection, and these are areas where there's something to protect, like structure-wise. So you can see Wasatch Front doesn't light up as much because these are like the Cottonwood Canyons, right? There's really not that much out there besides the water. And then you have kind of more down in the kind of east of Utah Lake. There's just like more houses out there. And so combining that all, you get, this is the final prioritization map of just that little, we'll show you the whole map later. But kind of overlaying all those things, you can see, as expected, Wasatch Front, super high priority. There's other areas that lit up, kind of by St. George, Cedar City, that lit up pretty highly as well. So, moving forward, steps to doing your own priority analysis. First, you're going to determine what size and type of data you want to work with. Are we working on a 30-meter grid raster? Are we working at a county level, at a state level, watersheds? Are we using rasters or vectors? Are we using both? You'll probably have both, honestly. And so then you're going to have to talk about or think about how to combine those. Do you want to turn all of your vectors into rasters? Do you want to turn all your rasters into vectors? That's a decision that will be made depending on your project. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so, for example, you want to be the right, you want to have your scale be commensurate with the work that you're trying to do, right? So shared stewardship, landscape scale projects, these are hundreds, thousands of acres. The sub-watershed made sense, and so we're doing the work within that area. Or maybe you want to do little bits and kind of find, you want your area of work to be bigger than your different prioritization. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But yeah, you don't want 10-meter pixels if you're looking where to put a neighborhood park. That's just like the wrong, you probably want like city block scale or something like that. But it's just something to keep in mind to get a meaningful result. So step 2, you're going to clip and summarize the data within your areas. So it's super important to clip out your data within your area of interest because this is all a relative scale. Like, for example, there is a countrywide wildfire risk analysis that was done, and at some 120-meter resolution or so, and it was done the whole state, the whole country. And if you were to compare the whole country to itself, a state like Vermont, they're not going to have like any wildfire risk, right? Because like on a relative scale, Utah and California and Oregon, they're all going to light up super hot, and those are going to be where you do it. So Vermont has to rescale all of this and reprioritize for its own purposes, because then they'll find those little areas that do light up. And so you got to clip to like the area that you want to work with. Is that a county? Is that the whole state? Is that your city? Whatever. Let's see. So this image here, this is from another project. So it started as a 30-meter raster, and that was going to be too small for my purpose. This was for looking for fuel breaks. So those are the kind of wide corridors to stop potential fire. So I resampled everything to a excuse me, to about a 10-acre parcel, because realistically that's about the size that you would kind of do work in, like kind of 10-acre chunks. You could string along 10-acre wide line of work. And so, now we have simpler data to work with, and you can summarize this using whatever way makes sense. Is that an average? Is that that maximum value, the minimum value?
Is that a generalization of your data there, or are you zooming in?
No, it's a generalization. This is the same extent. So, and yeah, so you lose a lot of the granularity, but for this purpose, it's like, yeah, and your little blues disappear because they kind of get washed out by the surrounding things. But that was okay for this because we wanted it on a smaller scale. And so some tools to consider using when doing this kind of work. I was like, I always have to look these up, so I thought I'd write them down for you. Because they're not things I use all the time. And so there's like a nice, neat little list, and there's others, and when you start Googling this stuff, it's like, there's so many things, and you'll use one and you realize that doesn't actually work. Now you have to go find something else. So it's a lot of trial and error, a lot of poking around to see what makes sense. I'll wait for you to write it down. Still writing a list. Okay, you good? Okay, too late. All right, so step 3. And this is like kind of where the rubber meets the road. We're going to normalize the data within our area of interest. And so I pulled this little like definition from Wikipedia. Basically, we're going to turn all of our numbers into a common scale. You can be 0 to 1, you can do it 0 to 100, you can do it 15 to 79, like it doesn't matter. But what you're going to get is you're going to get just like easier numbers to make sense of, and you're going to kind of put everything within the same scale. So starting here, we've got, bear with me on the, I just like made these up, and just, this is all within Google Slides. So, going through this little formula, it's the formula to put things on a scale from 0 to 1. The numbers on the left turn into the numbers on the right. I thought I had something else. So that's just super basic, right? But now we have 3 data sets that we're like combining somehow. And when you look at these, you're like, well, shoot, how do I combine numbers that range from 3 to 13 with numbers that range from 45 to 200, or what it was, 849, and then this other one has negative numbers in there. It's like, I can't just add those together. You're going to lose all of everything on the one on the left is going to get washed out, right? It's just like going to get overwhelmed by those bigger numbers. And then the negatives, like, I don't know, like those didn't even, you can't even have negative numbers in these other data sets. So how do we make that all work? So this is kind of, this is about, I just, again, pardon the color scale, but this is just to kind of easy to keep track. So we're going to normalize all of these numbers, and now we can see that they make sense. They're all the same relative to each other, and now we're comparing apples to apples. And so it's just a nice way to work with data. And like with the negative numbers, you know, there's like a little bit of math to get those all to be positive, but it's all just, like I did this in Excel. Like it's addition and multiplication. So now we can combine these in a meaningful way. And so there's a few different ways you can combine your data. The easiest is just adding them together. You'll get, you know, your maximum will be 3 for this example, right? Because you could have one line up on everyone, your like biggest, most priority spot. So then you'll get this resulting grid. You can then normalize it if you want. You don't have to. You can normalize your results, so then your final results are also between 0 and 1, or 0 and 100, or 0 and 10.
Would that be the same as averaging it?
It is the same as averaging it. You can add them, you can average them. So yeah, so if you averaged it instead of done the addition here, you're still not going to get 0 to 1. You're going to get 0 to, you know, 0.8, because it'll be 2.4 divided by 3. I did it both. So yeah, you can average it too. And then you'll still get 0 to 1, but you're not going to hit 1 unless they all line up. And so again, it's same. And then you can normalize it again. It's the same results. I double checked, even though in my mind it's like, I know that's right, but yeah, exactly. It's like you're dividing by 3 or not. So now you can see with all of these, like, okay, that little upper right-hand corner, that's where we want to do our work. But maybe we don't actually, maybe that's not the right way. Maybe we need to weight our features. Maybe we really care about the grid number 1. That's like 3 times as weighty as the other 2. So we're going to multiply everything by 3 and renormalize, and we get, and for comparison, these are the 2 different results. Similar, but different things are lighting up because we have different priorities now. And so this is something, I mean, and the weighting, that is up to you and whoever you're doing this project with, because you can make things look however you want them to look with weighting. So that's something to keep in mind throughout this whole process. It's like, it's really easy to get the results you're looking for. That's not necessarily the goal of this process. You want to find what the results are. So that's kind of how the weighting works. You can multiply it by whatever you want and then renormalize it, and you can get your same sort of grid here. And so just a few examples. Oh, I'm going to get done real early. A few different examples of, I don't know how well you can see the actual like lines over that imagery, but so this was from my master's project. So this was looking at where to put these fuel breaks, and I used this kind of watershed around Panguitch. Just chose it. There was really no reason. But in the first one, I wanted areas with high expected net value change were there to be a fire. So that's like this big analysis that's done. The Forest Service provided that data of like, okay, if the fire was going to burn here, are we going to have a positive or a negative effect, and how far on either side of that? So that's a relative scale. I wanted a low PCL, which is a potential control location. So this is an area that you would likely be able to control a fire. And it's a really cool product, also kind of through the Forest Service. I would love to talk about that if anyone's interested, but we're not going to talk about it now. And then a low SDI, which is a suppression difficulty index. So like, how hard is it to stop a fire there? That takes in a number of parameters. Slope, fuel, how long it would take to dig a line is like some sort of analysis that the Forest Service has. So combining all of these and get this kind of final answer on the right. And I wanted to mention here that because of the way the data for this ENVC layer was, you can kind of tell on the scale here, it goes from 0 to 1, but like up here, this is 0.18. So like most of the data is like scrunched really far down on what, it's really skewed. And so to get around that, instead of doing a straight average or addition or what I talked about before, this was a geometric mean, which is used for, again, not a mathematician. This was advice from my advisor and then some Googling. But it's basically multiplying together and then taking the root, in this case the cube root, but however many layers you have to get, and it distributes the data a little bit more. It kind of like spreads out that skew. I don't know how. Again, not a mathematician. Sounds like magic to me. And here's the shared stewardship priority layer as a whole. So again, we have our drinking water, hazardous fuels, strategic protection areas combined into our full priority. And the way you actually, I realize I forgot to put a slide about this, but the way you actually present your prioritization is also like a decision to make. In this case, and in the case of the one before, I broke it into quantile, like 20 percentile quantile kind of symbology, really, using, it's like really easy. And so in this case, we wanted the top 20% like priority areas. That's where we're gonna we're only gonna give money to people who are doing work in these areas with the top 20% highest scores of our prioritization. But maybe you have a threshold that you cut off. Maybe you do want the top 50%. Maybe you only want the top 5%. And so you can kind of play with the numbers that way. But this was a nice, clean, easy way to do it. Makes a really pretty map. And then the other thing is kind of cool. If you have, in particular, 2 or 3 layers that you're using, you can create this kind of multivariate map, and I think this is a really cool map. If you want to see how to make it, you can scan that QR code. It's a John Nelson like blog, but basically using the CMY color scheme and doing a little bit of arcade, you can show what combination of your layers are contributing to your final score. So you can see that magenta, those areas are our hazardous fuels. I can't see it from here. Okay, so like those areas, the score is being dominated by hazardous fuels. These dark blue, that's a combination of hazardous fuels and drinking water. And so you can kind of see on the color wheel like what's influencing your final score. Kind of cool. It's like a neat thing to play around with. I'd recommend looking at this tutorial. So using that basic framework, you can kind of go to town. I was like doing my best to like brainstorm other like non-land management sort of ideas of what you could prioritize. And so like maybe you work for public works in your city and you need to replace a bunch of pipelines. Like, okay, maybe it's all in one layer too. And so you can use the age, the material of that pipeline, the number of people that pipeline serves, and the diameter of that pipeline, and somehow score those in a way that makes sense to you and your agency and figure out where you should start. Maybe to put a new bus route somewhere. Maybe which schools within a district need renovation. I don't know. Like, again, I only do land management. So it's like, the possibilities are like kind of endless, but you just gotta, being the expert on your own data, you will get better ideas than these. And like I mentioned a second ago, you don't need multiple layers. If you have all of these different fields within your same data, you can just use those all stacked on each other. So basically, in conclusion, you got this. Like, it's not hard. Like, I am not like a super genius when it comes to this analysis stuff. I am like, I'm a competent user. And I will say that having this kind of process makes it really easy to get buy-in from the people you're trying to actually like influence or who are asking you to help make these decisions, right? We're service. We are our positions. We're at the service of others. So if they ask for something like this, like it's really easy for them to go to somebody and say, well, no, this is why we're doing it. Like the data shows, here it is. It's nice and bright pink on this map. That's where we're going to start our work. And yeah, that's all I got. We're going to get on nice and early. So any questions? Oh, was that good? No. Go ahead, Buck.
I came in a little late. Did you talk about kind of the importance of having subject matter experts to help you? Because I know when we went through this process, it wasn't us making the decisions on where to set the parameters. It wasn't Michelle. It was subject matter experts.
Right.
And if they don't carry their weight, then these prioritization projects can really struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on it very lightly, but yeah, this process is most likely being done in conjunction with the people, again, who are asking for this work to be done. Maybe you can show them, but yeah, we're generally not the experts on the work that's going down on the ground. So it's really nice to get that buy-in from other people, again, to help like spread the gospel of your GIS work and help make those decisions. Yeah.
Could you go back a few slides to where you have those 4 maps? So in the end, this map that's on the right, far right, that was the end product for the project.
Yes.
This was to show flammability, or?
This is to show areas that are susceptible to fire, that have a lot of surface drinking water, that serve populations, and that have things at risk to fire, buildings, transmission lines. So it's kind of combining everything. This is where we want to do fuels work in order to help reduce the risk of wildfire.
Okay, but existing infrastructure that represented field work, was that part of the analysis? And what I mean is things like your fire hydrant installation, I don't know, just things to combat that's all kind of plays into
yeah, in the strategic protection, that was like a pretty complex analysis in itself, and it does take into account things like response time to these areas, because that's what in these areas, this is all Forest Service land, so for the most part, and so there's not really infrastructure out there other than maybe some fire stations that are located, but so that is taken into account in this particular analysis. It's just like kind of really baked into the data.
And it appears that this final data, even these 3 stages, are polygonal, and I'm seeing a lot of the same polygons throughout. What do they represent? I mean, they don't look like counties.
These are watersheds. These are a sub-watershed, is Huck 12.
Because they look like they have very intricate boundaries that are
they're following ridge lines, basically. Yeah, ridge lines on top of mountains and stuff. So, and that's a data set that is a USGS data set, I believe. And they're like the keepers of that. Yeah, and like a lot of the stuff, a lot of these analyses that you can do, I mean, as FFSL, we don't own that much data. Like, we rely really heavily on other agencies. We use a lot of Forest Service data. We use a lot of from the UGRC. We pull in other sources and then kind of make things work. So there's so much data out there. I bet you can do all sorts of stuff with just stuff that's in the SGID.
And Portal, there's so much new good stuff.
Oh yeah.
Portal these days.
Yeah, I mean, you could do something like that. You can find, like, you know, the best breweries in walking distance that are also close to the park or whatever, like in Bend. It's like you can really just like go crazy with this kind of stuff. But yeah.
So I have seen like using this magic by power of tens.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense? So what I think like I don't know, you plan on this particular project, but what do you use? You use power of 10 for 1 and 100 and 1,000. So when you combine them, you know actually if one cell is like 1,000 whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, okay, is like a high priority of this, and then tens come from there, so you have an idea of the end when you look at the data. So I don't know if I can do that here, but
I mean, yeah, it would really just be a way of like in that scale, kind of doing it in that way. And it sounds like that's a lot of like a presence absence, right? So it's like if it's there, then you get a 10. Am I kind of interpreting that correctly? And so then if you have 1 million,
combine them,
mm-hmm.
you get something 10.
Yeah.
It's from the first one, and if you have 100,
yeah.
then you have 100, 200, 300. So you know that your priority is 300. You got the 300. It's like, oh, for the second
Mm-hmm.
hazard, I have priority, but the first one I have 10, which is the lowest. So
That's, yeah, I mean, and you could almost do that like kind of in parallel with something like this too. So it's like maybe you have your kind of final map that shows where your priorities are, and then you have that kind of power of 10 analysis to show you what's feeding, like kind of in the same, instead of doing it like this when you're like interpreting colors. But you have like, oh, well, okay, I can see that because it's 700, that 7 of these things showed up, so I know that's what's influencing that particular. Yeah, I think that would be, I could see that totally working either in replacement or in conjunction. All right.
So this multivariate mapping, has there been any advancements in the software to perform this in a simpler way?
I think so. I think at least with the bivariate. I'm not sure with the multivariate. I feel like I've seen it show up like in Pro. I haven't looked because I haven't had a reason to like do it again. I kind of hope so, because the legend is a little kind of hacked in, and it's just like a
So this power of 10 analysis, would that produce something like that, but more numerically?
I would imagine so. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, that you can kind of, yeah, that's really interesting.
Because it's cool to look at the image and think about it, but there's no quantification.
Right.
Modify it other than just the way it
right.
comes out through the color blending and seeing why.
Yeah, and I do have it. So this data it's on our website. You can pull it in yourself, and it does actually have the individual scores for each layer, so you can go through and see the different, what the water score was compared to the strategic protection compute. So it's all in there if you were interested.
So you said you did that in Arcade?
The actual this analysis, yeah. I think it was in Arcade, or it was like it's just a simple, like, yeah. It's like, when you go do your, it's like you hit the little button and it pops up with an expression, and so it's basically like taking the number and multiplying it by a certain number and assigning that value to each R or the cyan or magenta, and then it adds them all together for your. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty cool. John Nelson does a better job. Yeah.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
I just want to say you could achieve a very similar thing if you're doing a raster-based analysis instead of polygons, just by layer stacking the rasters together.
Yeah.
And then assigning a color to each.
Yeah, that would also work. This lends itself to polygons, but for sure. We all know with Arc Pro, in Esri in general, there's like 1,000 ways to skin this cat. So anyway, I just, so next, you can, next time they ask you where to do something, noodle it around. Go play with some stuff. you can email me. I'll help you out. And I'll be like, I don't know.
25 people there.
Wow.
And only 3 of them were his family, him and his mom and dad.
Oh, man.
Okay, everybody, we'll go ahead and get started now, so Julia can get through all of this. I'm sure she has plenty to disseminate to us. So hers is managing end-to-end data using web apps and Integromat. Julia is a recent graduate of the University of Utah with a Master's of Science in GIS. She's worked at the local and state levels. She's been an intern for the city of Hurricane and worked for oil, gas, and mining. There, I knew there was somebody from here. And she's been a full-time analyst at the Utah Division of Emergency Management for the past year and a half. Outside of GIS, she likes to be outside. And she loves cooking and going on road trips to camp. She likes mountain biking and climbing all over the Mountain West. And she loves playing strategic board games with her fiance and friends. As well as reading, and should this say sci-fi fantasy or just fantasy?
Both. Fantasy and sci-fi fantasy.
I wouldn't admit to the fantasy part. She likes reading fantasy novels. Currently working on Brandon Sanderson's collection. Who's Brandon Sanderson?
A famous fantasy writer from Utah who just broke the world record in...
See the one that lives in American Fork?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I've been to his house a few times. Okay.
Mistborn is, and the Stormlight Archives, and...
Okay, sci-fi fantasy.
Did you mean sci-fi? No? Yeah, it was a GoFundMe or something. No, it was I forget what platform, but he accidentally wrote 5 extra books during COVID, and they did this like GoFundMe to... if you wanted to get the books, and he had like $30 million in a few weeks.
Wow.
Anyways.
Yeah, I knew he was rich, so. Anyway, go ahead, Julia.
So, and now that you know my whole life story.
Hey, you put it on.
I know, I guess. So I'm from the state's Division of Emergency Management, and today I'm going to be talking about managing end-to-end data using web apps and Integromat. When I'm talking about managing end-to-end data, I really mean from collection to review, notifications, editing, maybe approving, and then sharing with stakeholders as well. And I'm going to be talking about this through the lens of a project that I've been working on for the Utah Search and Rescue Financial Assistance Application and Reimbursement Program. So a little background on the program itself. It's been going for the last 25 years almost, and it is basically what it sounds like, where counties can submit an application to the state to get reimbursed for expenses they've had on searches and rescues, but they can also get reimbursed for training the responders or for upgrading or purchasing new equipment. So, as I've said, this has been going on for the last 25 years, and it's all been paper. So they fill out the paper application, they send it into the state. There's a person in our office, the administrator, who spends probably 1,000 hours a year manually entering all of the application data into Excel spreadsheets. And then about a year ago, maybe a little more, they came to us and asked to create like a public dashboard to just kind of summarize this data from the past 25 years, and a place where stakeholders or the public can just come and see what's going on with this program. So we did that, and this dashboard is public, but it needs to be updated quarterly, and she's still inputting the manually inputting the paper forms into the spreadsheets, and I need to take it and reformat it to work with Arcgis online. And so this is kind of where we came up with the idea, why don't we make this easier? So start collecting the data digitally to begin with, and seamlessly go throughout the process, ending in this stakeholders dashboard. So this is the general flow of the process. I'm going to go over these each briefly now, and then I will dive deeper, so don't worry if you're a little bit confused off the bat. So obviously the first step is collecting the information, and this is through an online survey where the search and rescue commander or the county administrator is submitting the actual application. And they can, although this is a financial reimbursement program, we also collect statistical information, so even if they're not requesting something, they can still record information about searches and rescues to be included in the public dashboard. So the next step in the process is if the application does have a financial request, then it needs a sheriff's signature. Like that's just, you know, part of the program. The application needs a signature, even though the sheriff isn't the one filling it out. They need to approve it. So there's a dashboard where each sheriff can log in and see the relevant applications for their county, review the information, and sign it. And then this is an optional step. For some counties want to have an additional review step before it goes to the sheriff, where the commander will review any of the applications that have been submitted for their county just to verify accuracy of information and make sure the sheriff's getting the complete information. Sometimes the commander's the one submitting it initially, but in certain cases, like an administrator is and the commander wants to review it. The next step, once it's been signed by the sheriff, and this is again just for the financial requests, it needs to be reviewed by the state administrator to make sure all the attachments are there. Another step of verification to make sure the application's complete before it goes to the board for review. And that's what happens here. The state board looks at all the applications and says, yes, this application is approved and we're going to fulfill the request. No, it's not, or it's partially reviewed or partially accepted, and they have their own criteria for that, which I don't know exactly the details of. Okay, so before I dive into this, I am going to talk about both the user experience for each of these steps, as well as kind of diving into more of the data management back end tips and tricks that I've learned throughout this process. And again, this is going to be specific to the search and rescue application that I'm talking about, but the same process can be applied to lots of different topics. So this, what you see in the center of the screen, is what the old form looked like. The new form, which you see on the right, is actually publicly available, and that's because there's different people within each county that might be submitting the application, and that can change fairly frequently. So we wanted to keep just the general submission open to the public. And then, so two things that I want to note that the survey actually kind of helps improve upon are, if you might be able to see in this initial form, there's only one form, but you can submit for search and rescue, you can submit for trainings, or you can submit for equipment. And they just had to kind of figure out which boxes they were supposed to fill out for what. You might see where this is going. In the online survey, they can pick what kind of application they're submitting, and then only questions that are relevant to that application show up, and those are the ones they're going to fill out. The other thing that's nice about the digital form is the attachments, because they have a lot of, they're attaching receipts or proof of purchase or rosters or whatever. They need a lot of attachments for these applications, so being able to complete the survey on your phone and just take a picture versus scanning and copying and saving the PDFs and keeping track of that just makes it a lot easier. So how is the survey made? Survey 123 Connect, which, if you don't know, is the desktop application for Survey 123. So this is just the kind of user interface, and then most of the configuration happens in an Excel spreadsheet. So as you could probably guess from the fact that there's different questions based on what you submit, there's lots of relevant fields and lots of calculations. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I do want to highlight one specific one that is really important for the data management aspect of this, and that is this categorization field that I put at the end. So I really wanted to minimize the number of surveys, like feature layers, dashboards that I was using. I wanted it all to be synced up and connected. So in order for that to happen, I needed a way to classify what step in the process the application was at. So like what the status is. And so this is one of the fields that one of the field calculations. I'm not going to go into all the specifics, but basically some of this information is collected in the initial survey, some is collected in the sheriff dashboard, in the admin dashboard, and then finally in the board review. And that just kind of relates to the status. And I'll show later on how I use this to kind of filter where it shows up. So I did say that using the same survey for the initial submission versus in the dashboards, but I wanted certain questions to not show up in the initial submission. I don't want the commander or the admin to be able to do the sheriff's signature. I don't want them to be able to actually approve their application. So for certain fields, I use this fun little pull data at property mode equals edit a lot of times throughout this. And this just basically means when you're in the initial submission, you're not going to be seeing these questions. But when the survey is embedded in a dashboard, as I'll show you later, these specific questions will show up. And because you can configure that it's in edit mode and not in submitting mode. Now just a few little formatting things that I learned, maybe you guys already know, but I just thought were super useful when doing this process. You can add a logo to a survey, fun fact, by adding a picture to the media folder. You can add bullets using the HTML tag, and these do just show up based on what expenses they've reported. If they only report expenses for fuel and food, only these two will show up. If they just reported for lodging, only this one would show up, and etc.
Job for the IRS. That would be very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And then the final thing that I wanted to note about here is notices for the submitter, like things that I wanted to draw their attention. In this specific example, they have 45 days from the initial search or equipment purchase or whatever to submit the application before it's considered late, and then they get various penalties. I don't know exactly how it works, but on the reimbursement end of things. So I just wanted them to make sure you have until this date to finish submitting this application. Then just two more quick things about the survey. I used repeats and table lists. Repeats are a related table that allows you to add multiple iterations of some data and associate it back to the main application. So in this case, I have victims here. Obviously on a search, you may encounter more than one victim. So this allows you to add as many victims as needed, and they're all still associated back with the same application. And table list is just, it'll show up in the bottom here in a second. It's a simplified way of collecting data where they have the same potential answers, and I just wanted to compact this survey as much as possible so they're not scrolling forever, and I found that this was a really helpful solution. This is just how it's configured in Survey 123 Connect. All right. Also kind of related to the survey, but not in Survey 123, the counties need a way to document what their submission. And in the past, they've just made paper copies and put them in the filing cabinet. With Survey 123, how we are kind of getting around this is automatically generating reports with Integromat, or Make, formerly Integromat, where this report that you see on the right will automatically fill with the information submitted in the application, and then it will go directly to the county it's submitted for, their point of contact or administrator. We have a specific person on file, and it'll automatically be sent to them whenever a survey is submitted. Then kind of in the same process, if an application is submitted and it has a financial request, you kind of see here, this one doesn't have a financial request because there's zeros in all of the, there's no totals. But if it does have a financial request, we want to let the sheriffs know, hey, now might be a good time to check your dashboard because you have a new application to review. So on the back end, Integromat Make uses webhooks, which are, I'm going to mess this up, but webhooks basically allow an app to send data to another application in real time. So basically, the webhook is generated in Survey123, and then you enter it into Integromat or Make, and it starts listening for the survey. So then when a survey happens, when a submission happens, it says, oh, we've got a survey, now what do we need to do with it next? And you can also connect this to email or Google, or, I mean, there's hundreds, if not more, different applications you can connect this to. Before I move on, are there any questions on the application? Okay. So the next step is the commander review. And this, they need a login because they're going to be reviewing already submitted application. We can't have this publicly available. So the way that I have managed this is through a Survey123 field app. So from their perspective, what they need to do is download Survey123 and either the desktop or the mobile, download the survey, and then this will be queried so that they only see what's relevant to their county, what they need to be reviewing. So they click on it, and then they see all the information that was entered in the survey. I'm just going to note here, this is still in beta, so you're not seeing any real data up here on the screen. So, one second. This is going to keep beeping at me if I don't turn it off. Okay. So they're able to go through the application, make any edits that they need, make sure that it's correct. And then at the end, they say, do I still want to review this more, or is it ready to go to the sheriff? If they say it's ready to go to the sheriff and they hit submit, then it disappears from their inbox and it goes to the sheriff dashboard. So how is it made? It's actually a copy of the original Survey123, but instead of just publishing it like you normally would, there's a submission URL here. And this submission URL is pointing at a view layer of the original feature layer published by the survey. So that view layer is filtered so it's only looking at the appropriate county. So they're not able to see or edit information that's not related to their county. And then you also need to enable the inbox in the Survey123 Connect. And this query right here is what we use. It's a question in the original survey to say, is your county one of the ones that needs to have commander approval? And obviously they need a login for this. At DEM, the Division of Emergency Management, we have hub community accounts that we're able to allocate to our community partners. And then we just assign, we give them access to these. Any questions on that?
Can they go back into anything that they've submitted or completed at any steps?
So not the commander. Like the commander, once they say it's ready for the sheriff, then it disappears from their inbox. There is steps further on where there can be review.
Just thinking, I don't know how many times I hit submit.
Yes, sorry. The question was, can they go back and review what they've submitted? And up to this point, no. The initial submission is just open to the public. You can't go back and see. It is in draft mode, so you can kind of fill it out and then come back to it later on the same computer. And you do get the report, so you can see, oh, there was an error. But I'll get to how that's kind of dealt with in a minute. Yes. So that was that question.
Did you set up groups for each county?
Yes, I did. And I will get into that next, actually. Okay, so the sheriff dashboard. Instead of talking about this picture, I'm actually going to show you what it looks like. Oh, of course it logged me out. Okay, and this is for the full state, but each county will have a dashboard that they're only seeing their county. It'll say like Beaver County Sheriff, or Salt Lake County, whatever. So right now across the state, it says I have 38 cases that need to be approved or signed in this case, and we see those in the list here on the left. And if I scroll down, you can actually see sheriffs want to be able to see the applications that don't have a request, that don't have a financial component as well. So those actually show up here in blue. But we want to look at one that needs to be signed. So we'll go to the case details and one that I submitted. And this just brings up relevant information to the sheriff. So there's more information than this in the application, but this is filtered and kind of formatted so it's easier to look at from the sheriff's point of view. And then over here on the right, when you click something, it'll pull up a modified application where it just shows some of the key indicators and gives them this box to sign. So it's a terrible smiley face. I'm used to my mouse. It looks more unsure. So they just sign and date their application, review the point of contact information, which will autofill, and then make sure it's correct. Well, that's no info. Then once they submit, it actually, if you give it a second, will update over here. It gets removed from the list and there's less cases to review. It actually goes over to this submitted list. They're able to see cases that have already been submitted, they've already signed. They can see their status, if they've already been reviewed, were they approved or were they denied. So just a couple other things to mention on this dashboard. We've got this heat map, which for each county, so they can see, maybe there's a hot spot of where their searches and rescues are happening. Maybe they need preventative measures in that area. So that was just, this is more nice to know, not necessary for submitting the application. But another thing that's nice to know is mission statistics for their county. And then you can also filter the application, say, oh, I just want to look at search and rescue applications today, not the equipment or training. You can filter the list there. So that's kind of the bones of the sheriff dashboard, and each sheriff will have their own dashboard. Okay, so now to how it's made, and honestly this is probably where I'll spend the bulk of my data management discussion on. So I'm going to talk about the back end and then how the dashboard is made, and then we'll go from there. So I said each sheriff has their own dashboard, and we want to make sure that the sheriffs are only able to sign applications that are within their county. Like, that's pretty critical. We can't have one rogue sheriff going crazy and signing everyone's applications. So in order to do this, we've got to create a view layer for every county, a web map to put that view layer in for every county, and then a dashboard that hosts that map and points at the layers within that. That's a lot of work. I don't want to do that every time. So I did create a script API for Python to automate creating the view layers, automate creating the web maps and adding the appropriate view layer to the web map, and then ideally eventually create this for the dashboards, but I have not had as much luck with that. And so I did manually just clone the dashboard for each county. And then kind of along the same line, the API for Python was used to create the user accounts, the user groups, and add the appropriate data and maps and dashboards to each of the groups. So that's where I wanted to have less than this, but I think in order to keep the data secure, you need to have the view layers. Oh, and this is just what happens like when you run the script to create view layers, just pops up in Arcgis Online. All right, so for the dashboard itself, this is where the status, the categorization that I was originally talking about comes in. So I classify, these are all of the classification categories, and this right here is the list on the sheriff's dashboard. So I only wanted them to be able to see in this list, waiting on the sheriff's signature and no financial assistance request. Then I sorted that based on the order, because I wanted the action items to appear first. And I also wanted to highlight things that something needed to be done. So to do that, I did a little arcade script right here to basically say, if status equals waiting on sheriff's signature, then change the background color to orange. So that's a good use of arcade that I've found. And I already talked about the heat map. So to get the survey 123 embedded in the dashboard, and that's what you saw me signing the application and submitting, you need a URL parameters to put into the embedded content widget. And this is actually not the whole thing. It's a really long URL that basically says the global ID field if you select it in the list in the dashboard, it pull up the global ID that matches within this survey. And then I say, these fields, that's what these fields equal to make sure they autofill correctly. And then also, very important here is hiding fields that are not relevant. So in the sheriff dashboard, you'll see there are different fields than what appear in the admin dashboard or the board dashboard. So that's kind of where you can do that. Then I just copied and pasted this into the submission URL. All right. Any questions on that big section?
Are you building your dashboards in Dashboard or this is Experience Builder?
In Dashboard. Yep. So any other questions? Sorry. The question was, am I building the dashboards in Dashboard or Experience Builder? And the answer is Dashboards. Okay. All right. We'll move on to the Administrator dashboard. Oh, I clicked End, not Next. There we go. All right, so this is very similar to the sheriff's dashboard. You see the applications that have been signed by the sheriff on the left, and then different fields pop up on the right, including an administrator code, where the admin can put in the code that we designate, and they'll see relevant questions such as, is this ready for the board review? One thing that they can actually do in the admin dashboard is hold applications that need additional information or are maybe under investigation. This is where they could add edits. So the administrator would be the one to make changes if need be to the application. Another thing that the administrator often does now is they have an additional 45 days to submit the rest of their attachments. So if they email the attachments to the administrator, they can add them in this step. So there's also summary statistics on this dashboard, but more relating to expenses and expense breakdown, just because that's what's more relevant to the administrator. How is it made? Pretty much the same as the sheriff dashboard, but there were a few questions that required the administrator code. The sheriff wouldn't have that administrator code. It doesn't even show up on their application, but if it did, they can't change the status. And then, so it's basically the same, the categorization based on the status, and that this admin code is done in Survey 123 Connect. Okay, last but not least, the board dashboard, this is where the actual review of the applications happen. So they also have the list on the left. they're only seeing ones that were designated by the administrator. Yes, this is ready to be reviewed by the board. The application's complete. It has all the attachments. It's not on hold for any reason. So that's what they only see those here on the left. They have different summary statistics, but they see the same general information. And then they see some different questions here on the right, such as how much, like, were the total expenses that were requested, is that how much was approved? Was some of it approved? Was none of it approved? And they have criteria which kind of helps determine that. But this is where they enter in the actual approval that can be then sent to finance to carry those out. Again, just the summary expenses. How's it made? I'm not going to go over and say the same thing for the third time. But it's basically the same as the other dashboards that I've talked about. One thing I don't think I mentioned is the admin dashboard and the board dashboard. That's only one. So the counties each have one per county, but at the administrator and board level, there's only one, with all of the users having accounts and access. So this all, like through every step in this process, we're recording this information in one hosted feature layer. So, and there, like all of the edits and everything are controlled through views, but we have one hosted feature layer that can then feed this public stakeholder dashboard that anyone can access. And it's live now, but it's not currently being filled with the process I just talked about, because that's being deployed July 1st. So it's definitely still in testing. Oh, that's what I just said. So this is actually the survey, which you guys are welcome to go and test. It is still in testing. It doesn't matter if you don't know what a search and rescue application looks like. You can just make up a fun, like, I don't know, Yeti attacked a hiker. And so you're welcome to submit that. I'm going to pull up the dashboard now. So once you submit, you can see it just pop right up. And while that's going, are there any more questions?
I was going to ask, in the previous section you showed how you used the API for Python. Was that just to create the layers that you were going to? You said that you didn't work with dashboard yet, though?
Yes, so the question was about using the API for Python and whether it was just to create the layers. Yeah, I used that to create the layers, the maps, add the layers to the maps, create the user groups, and add the appropriate data to the user groups. The dashboards, there is a clone items method where in theory you can map the service, the ID, like, so I can change the map for each dashboard as I create it, but I haven't gotten it to work. So that's where that is. You do? Oh, yes, I will be talking to you after.
Did you work with all the different sheriff's offices, and how did they take it?
So he asked if I worked with all the sheriff's offices. I didn't work with each of them individually. The Search and Rescue Advisory Board is made up of primarily sheriffs, and so they were kind of the first testing group. I did present this to the sheriffs. The sheriffs have a monthly meeting, so I presented it to them. Seemed like they took it fine. Some of them were like, this is, what did they say? This is James Bourne stuff. I was like, but, yes.
Not James Bond.
I mixed them up. My bad, sorry. Yeah, so, but I have had them testing it since, and not everyone has been testing it, but a lot of people have, and not every county does this process. But it also will be presented at the Search and Rescue Conference in a few weeks. All right, are there any other questions?
How long did this take you to make from start?
I haven't been working on it full time, but I've been probably since last November pretty consistently. A lot of trial and error.
How many fields are in your table?
I don't actually know exactly how many. I would guess like 50. Just, yeah, I don't know. The application's not super long, but.
No, I mean about keeping it short.
Oh.
50's pretty good.
All those approval bills and different things
Mhm.
like that. It's
You can
great
get
job
out.
putting it together. I'm impressed.
How do you get your little bar to stay up for your repeat up there? How the bar kind of like to add onto your repeat?
So it only stays up when you're in the,
Does it just do that? I haven't looked at that survey in a long time.
if it's only if you updated to the new one like a few months ago, because it used to be at the bottom and now it's up there. And I don't know if I love it, but that's where it is.
So have you migrated it over from Integramat to Make?
Yes, since this process is new,
You did it.
I did it, and the it's not live right now because I don't want the sheriffs to be getting emails every time someone submits a test for their county. But it is in Make.
What's up with Make? Integramat's not Integramat anymore?
Yeah, so they like changed the name, and I don't know what else they're doing, but you have to migrate your stuff over. And also Make is a terrible name in my opinion, because if you Google Integramat, Integramat comes up. If you Google Make, Make does not come up. It wasn't my fault, I promise.
Migrating over, so we had one that we had to migrate over, and they couldn't figure it out. They ended up figuring out what the issue.
I had an Integramat that I started, and I was like, well, I'm just going to do this in Make. So I didn't really migrate it so much as just started it in Make.
I'm super nervous. So if you have really big tile packages, remove them, and then, so you can't use the same webbook ever in multiple surveys. So you have to create new webhooks, but it won't create a new webhook if you have a large tile package. So you have to remove your tile package, create your webhook, and then migrate, and then put it back into.
Packages for offline base now, so.
Yes. And it causes problems.
Insert 1, 2, 3.
So when they're like using like our assessors use it very heavily. Yes, but we ran into that issue.
Are there any other questions for Julia? And Buck, you can take that outside.
Thank you for starting the discussion.
No,
And it looks like a
very good.
UJIC attendee was injured playing cornhole. So.
I got a last question.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned it was a public survey, right,
Mhm.
at the beginning. And as far as the review process, is there no login required to get in for those people that review them?
There is a login for everything except for the initial. So the commander, the sheriffs, the admin, and the board all require logins.
Okay, so they each have you given them all a login?
Yes, with Hub community accounts.
Do any of them have their own logins for their own county orgs that you use?
No.
Would you allow it?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I'd be happy to add people who already have ArcGIS Online accounts, but mainly it's like the sheriffs. It's not like the county that needs it, it's like the sheriff specifically that needs it. So usually the sheriffs don't have ArcGIS Online accounts, but could happen.
Excellent questions. Let's thank Julia for this presentation. I think cornhole's up next, isn't it?
Last chance for cornhole sign-ups, guys.
I signed up, but didn't get a text.
Not yet.
Okay.